So unfortunately, I forgot to put this video in my last, in my last video. I forgot to put this in my last video. I said I was going to. For evolutionists, this is a very humorous video. This guy's name is, I believe, Ray Comfort. He's a creationist, I believe from Australia or New Zealand, somewhere like that. I think it's New Zealand. But what's funny is he believes that the banana, as you remember from the last video, I showed a wild type banana, that the banana was created perfectly by God for the consumption of man, not taking into consideration the amount of domestic selection that took place regarding the banana. But here is the video. You will find this humorous, although some people nowadays might consider it to be homophobic, but it is quite hilarious.
The atheist's nightmare. Now, if you study a well-made banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 ridges.
Now, what I find funny, though, is he refers to this as the atheist's worst nightmare. This is, like, what's funny is they lump all evolutionists, Christians do this, especially creationists, they lump all evolutionists together as atheists. I am not an atheist. I am a scientific pantheist. I do not believe in any of the biblical, 6 days and yada yada, 5,000-year-old Earth or any of that crap. I do believe in God. I believe God is nature, okay? But I believe that, God is God. I believe that everybody should read Ethics by Baruch Spinoza to get a clearer understanding of the reality of God. I also believe that people should read the works of Ralph Waldo Emerson to get a more clear understanding of the reality of God. And let's hit play here.
Behold, the atheist's nightmare. Now, if you study a well-made banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 ridges. On the close side, 2 ridges.
A well-made banana, because, sometimes apparently God does not make well-made bananas.
Get your hand ready to grip a banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 grooves, on the close side 2 grooves. The banana and the hand are perfectly made one for the other. You'll find the maker of the banana, Almighty God, has made it.
The best is watch Kirk Cameron. Kirk Cameron had this guy on his show. Watch Kirk Cameron's expressions while this guy is, demonstrating oral copulation with a banana. It's hilarious.
With a non-slip surface. It has outward indicators of inward contents. Green, too early. Yellow, just right. Black, too late. Now, if you go to the top of the banana, you'll find, as with the soda can makers, they placed a tab at the top. So God has placed a tab at the top. When you pull the tab, the contents don't...
Apparently, he's never seen a chimpanzee eat a banana where they open it at the bottom.
...squirt in your face. You'll find the wrapper, which is biodegradable.
Well, actually, technically, the top, if you've ever seen a banana grow, they grow upside down from what you would think.
Has perforations. Notice how gracefully it sits over the human hand. Notice it has a point at the top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. It's chewy, easy to digest. It's top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. Top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. Top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. It's chewy. Top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. It's chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the chewy, easy to digest.
Watch Kirk Cameron's reaction here. It's hilarious.
Shape for the human mouth. It's chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much easier. Seriously, Kurt, the whole of creation testifies to the genius of God's creative hand. It absolutely does.
So, hunter-gatherers as models in public health. Hunter-gatherer populations are remarkable for their excellent metabolic and cardiovascular health. What I find funny is I follow a guy who's a doctor of nursing from the UK, Dr. Campbell, and he talks about how so few Africans died of the unspeakable thing that shouldn't be spoken of. What he doesn't talk about is that rural Africans follow an anti-inflammatory diet. So the unspeakable thing that can't be spoken of didn't have many comorbidities in that population. So hunter-gatherer populations are remarkable for their excellent metabolic and cardiovascular health, and thus are often used as models in public health in an effort to understand the root evolutionary causes of non-communicable diseases. Here we review recent work on health activity, energetics, and diet among hunter-gatherers and other small-scale societies, subsistence farmers, horticulturalists, and pastoralists. What should be noted is most of these people have the same health benefits, whether they're subsistence farmers, horticulturalists, or pastoralists, as well as recent fossil and archaeological discoveries to provide a more comprehensive perspective on lifestyle and health in these populations. We supplement these analyses with a new data from the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer population in northern Tanzania. Longevity among small-scale populations approaches that of industrialized populations, and metabolic and cardiovascular disease are rare. Obesity prevalence is very low, under 5%, and mean body fat percentage is modest. Women 24 to 28%, men 9 to 18%. Activity levels are high. Activity levels are high. So we're going to get into that in a little bit too. Okay. Of moderate and vigorous, so exceeding 100 minutes per day of moderate and vigorous physical activity, but daily energy expenditures are similar to industrialized populations. Diets in hunter-gatherer and other small-scale societies tend to be less energy dense, meaning they're eating lower calories and moving around a heck of a lot more, richer in fiber, richer in micronutrients than modern diets, but are not invariably low carbohydrate. Not invariably low carbohydrate, because they can't be, because they're high in fiber. A more integrative understanding of hunter-gatherer lifestyle and health and lifestyle, including elements beyond diet and activity, will improve public health efforts in industrialized populations. Okay. This is from NPR. What do hunter-gatherers tell us about modern obesity in the wake of the 439 comment, blah, blah, blah. Let's see here. So in the risk factors for obesity and poor health through poor diet isn't alone. Lack of exercise is considered a major culprit as well. After all, we live in the West, have diverged from that original hunter-gatherer lifestyle that paleo advocates love to evoke, and we have that hunter-gatherers not only eat minimal levels of salt, sugar, and fat, but also expend far more energy than we ourselves do when they forage actively across large swaths of the landscape. Don't they? Thanks to a pointer by Adam Van Arsel in a great review article in the new issue of American Anthropologist, I made it, The Hunter-Gatherer, Energetics, and Human Obesity. Anthropologist Herman Ponster and his co-authors take a direct aim at one aspect of popular association between obesity and modern lifestyle compared to energy expenditures of the Hadza hunter-gatherers in Tanzania with people in the United States. Because the Hadza are vigorously active as they forage. The men hunt with bows and also gather honey. The women gather plants. Researchers expected to find that Hadza expended way more energy than we do. They don't, because their bodies have adapted to the energy expenditure. Except that's not at all what they found. As expected, the Hadza have lower body fat levels than Westerners, and they did have greater levels of physical activity. Their average daily energy expenditure, though, differed. So you have to understand, the human body, when you move around, it adapts to your moving around. So eventually you will burn less calories with exercise as your body adapts to the stress, okay? So that seems counterintuitive. Current models of obesity suggesting that Western lifestyles lead to decreased energy expenditure. The researchers hypothesize that there's a sort of ingrained human set point. We know this from the work of Roy Walford, I don't understand why they hypothesize this. Roy Walford already hypothesized this and proved this with the calorie restriction diet. In a piece for the New York Times, Ponser speculates that the Hadza's bodies compensate for high energy output and foraging by conserving energy on other physiological tasks. Of course, this study focuses on a single group of hunter-gatherers, 13 Hadza men and 17 women, whose energy levels were measured over 30 days. The tired phrase, more research is needed, fits well here. I think maybe if they did a meta-analysis, they might be able to find the research they're looking for, just saying. Pretty obviously, the take-home message of the Hadza study is not that physical activity isn't beneficial. Of course not. Physical activity is extremely beneficial. Massive amounts of data show the positive effects of exercise on cognitive and physical well-being. So what are the take-home messages? Flatley concludes that the obesity epidemic is not about being sedentary, but about diet. I wouldn't say that's true. I would not say that's true. And we're going to get into this with the the gene expression that exercise causes that helps with obesity. In this dude's words, it's about those alluring, blissful foods. It's about diet because remember, in my videos on phytonutrients and epigenetics, I got into the role of calorie restriction mimetics in the Okinawan diet that led to, the health benefits of caloric restriction without the caloric restriction combined with the overall caloric restriction of the Okinawan diet. The Hadza diet, and the Hadza diet is full of these foods also. The Hadza diet also points yet again to the poor reasoning that underlies attempts by some paleo advocates to emulate the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. The surprising study results remind us that when tested, our expectations about hunter-gatherer physiology and health may yield data quite divergent from our assumptions. Data from anthropology do indicate that there has always been an enormous variety in hunter-gatherer diet, foraging, and health. Any notion of the hunter-gatherer model is an illusion. I took flack from some quarters for saying so here, blah, blah, blah. Scientific American brings the case home in an informed, engaging way. Okay. And I'm going to move on. So many people don't understand that there is a lot of variability in hunter-gatherer diets. Also, what people don't understand is not everything in a hunter-gatherer's diet is beneficial. This is why the work of people like Joel Fuhrman, the Nutritarian diet, Eat to Live and whatnot, is so important, and I encourage people to read Joel Fuhrman's books. I don't agree with the amount of caloric restriction that he encourages, and I don't agree with the amount of protein restriction he encourages, and I'll cover that later also. And I want to be sure that people understand I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not an LPN, I'm not an RN, I'm not a chiropractor, I'm not anything like that. This video is not health advice. This is just me talking about stuff. If you have health concerns, seek out health advice from a licensed medical practitioner. So diets of modern hunter-gatherers vary substantially in their carbohydrate content depending on eco-environments results from the ethnographic analysis. In the past, attempts have been made to estimate the carbohydrate contents of pre-agricultural human diets. Those estimations have primarily been used on interpretations of ethnographic data of modern hunter-gatherers. In this study, it was hypothesized that the diets of modern hunter-gatherers vary in their carbohydrate content. No shit. Thus, using data of plant-to-animal subsistence ratios, they calculated the carbohydrate intake percentage of total energy in 229 hunter-gatherer diets throughout the world and determined how differences in ecological environments altered carbohydrate intake. They found a wide range of carbohydrate intake. Something that needs to be understood, though, in the modern world, this is another thing, modern humans do not need the amount of energy that hunter-gatherers do to do what hunter-gatherers do. Okay, so they found a wide range of carb. That's one of the big flaws with the starch solution. Okay, the starch solution, one of the biggest flaws is it's a gladiator's diet. Gladiators were well-trained athletes. If you look at people that run track consume quite a bit of carbohydrate. They're not fat. It's probably not the healthiest lifestyle, though, either, but they're not fat. They do consume quite a bit of carbohydrate, though. They found a wide range of carbohydrate intake, 3% to 50% of total energy intake. You have to remember, hunter-gatherers eat what they can find. That's what you have to understand. They eat what they can find. Hunter-gatherer diets were characterized by identical carbohydrate intake, 30 to 35% of total energy, over a wide range of latitude intervals. However, with increasing latitude intervals from 41 degrees to 60 degrees, carbohydrate intake decreased. Meaning, the closer you get to areas where there's not a lot of plants, the less likely you are to eat plants. Hunter-gatherers living in the desert and tropical grasslands consumed the most carbohydrates. Of course they did, because there's plants. Diets of hunter-gatherers living in northern areas, such as the tundra and northern coniferous forest, contained a very low carbohydrate content. That's because you can't get plant matter in the cold months. In conclusion, diets of hunter-gatherers showed substantial variation in their carbohydrate content, independent of the local environment. However, the range of... See, this is the thing. Independent of the local environment. I don't know how true that is. Okay, from studying survival, from being in Boy Scouts for survival, there are some plants available in cold weather climates. There's not many, though. Okay, it's not like you're going to be eating whole... bushels of berries and things like that in the winter. Okay, the range of energy intake from carbohydrates in the diet of most hunter-gatherer societies was markedly different, lower from the amounts currently recommended for healthy humans. So keep that in mind. So the energy intake from carbohydrates, so it was far lower from the amounts currently recommended for healthy humans. Examination on dietary patterns in different groups of African origin. Okay, so in population groups undergoing nutrition transition, it is important to identify healthy and culturally relevant dietary patterns that can be promoted as a means of preventing diet-related chronic disease. Dietary patterns analyses using data-driven methods are useful for the purpose. The central question addressed in this overview paper is whether there are cultural specific healthy eating patterns. Of course there are, or whether healthy diets may be more universal. What you will see is healthy diets are 100% universal, and I'm going to show that. I have shown that in the past by looking at the traditional diets, not necessarily, the ancestral diets. You can go to oldwayspt.org to see what a ancestral diet is for real. There's studies on dietary patterns and population groups of African origin living in Canada, Europe, Europe in Spain, and West Africa, inform the discussion. Healthy or prudent as opposed to Western eating patterns are identified in several cultures, including groups of African origin. It appears that a limited number of foods predict diet quality. So a limited number of foods predict diet quality. Outcomes in various populations. Okay, in particular, fruit and vegetable, fish, whole grain cereal, and legumes do so on the protective side. Keep that in mind. So these are what you should be eating if you want to live a long and healthy life. Okay, fruit, I don't really think fruit, but definitely vegetables. You can have some fruit, especially lower carbohydrate fruit like berries. So fruit, vegetables, fish, whole grain cereal, and legumes. Do so on the protective side, and of course sweets, processed meats, fried foods, fats and oils, and salty snacks do so on the negative side. Further research on dietary patterns and their healthfulness is required in diverse food cultures and groups of African origin. Traditional diets are healthier than non-traditional diets. Traditional diets are healthier than non-traditional diets. One more time, traditional diets are healthier than non-traditional diets. That have evolved with globalization, urbanization, and acculturation. So, as I said, Dr. Campbell was covering how in Africa, they did pretty well with the unspeakable thing that shouldn't be spoken of despite a lack of modern medicine. Well, they did very well because they are following a diet that's more similar to our great ape ancestors. Okay, more similar to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. You don't necessarily have to go back that far, and I'm going to show why. So people in Mali, Chad, Senegal, and Sierra Leone enjoy healthier diets than their counterparts in the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, or Canada. If you read the book Salubrious Living by somebody who won't be named, I highly encourage it. I do not recommend raw foodism. I do recommend adhering to a lifestyle that is more similar to the Seventh-day Adventist lifestyle. Okay, according to a study published in the Lancet Global Health this spring, using self-reported data, the reason I recommended Salubrious Living is it goes over the diets of indigenous people throughout the world. Okay. 89% of the world's adult population, researchers led by Fumiaki Imamura from the University of Cambridge, I was expecting Tokyo, analyzed the intake of healthy foods such as fruit, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and fish, as well as foods containing fiber and omega-3s. They also looked at the consumption of unhealthy foods such as sugary drinks, saturated fats, sodium, and processed meats. Taken all together, sub-Saharan Africa, particularly West Africa, ranked better than wealthier regions in North America and Europe, probably because of a diet comprised of lean meats, vegetables, legumes, and staple starches. Lean meats, vegetables, legumes, and staple starches, with less processed foods than countries that fared worse, such as the USA and Russia. There is one important caveat. The study examines only nutrition, the quality of diet, and does not speak of the quantity of food consumed. It assumes that all adults surveyed are consuming 2,000 calories a day. 2,000 calories a day is a little too much for the average American anyway. The prevalence of malnourishment in sub-Saharan Africa is around 24%. That's due to a lack of access to food, not the quality of the food. And I'm going to get into that later too. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization, looking at just diet quality is not perfect, we know, Imura told courts. For better public health, we should all look at any social and environmental factors, but we found little global health research on diet quality based on what people actually eat. So they decided to fill the piece of many existing issues. So the main conclusion of the study is that in much of the world, eating habits are getting worse. Keep that in mind. In much of the world, eating habits are getting what? Worse. They're getting worse. Worldwide consumption of healthy foods increased, but in high-income countries, that was often outpaced by the growing intake of unhealthy foods. So in high-income countries, it was outpaced by the growing intake of unhealthy foods. These eating habits contribute to the non-communicable diseases, cancer, cardiovascular disease, respiratory illness, that are expected to account for 73% of all deaths by 2020. So this is old. That's a reality that is already being felt in the developing world, including some parts of Africa, as people settle into a more sedentary urban lifestyle and obesity rates rise. Guess what? Swapping burgers for beans might help you. A groundbreaking colon cancer experiment that swapped the burgers and fries diet of African Americans. So now this is what needs to be understood. When you look at black Seventh-day Adventists, okay, that follow a Seventh-day Adventist lifestyle, their risk of disease is lower than that of the general population. Keep that in mind. It's not just genes. It's not just environment. It's environment and genes. Okay? So when you swap out the diet of African Americans, black Americans, with traditional fare of rural southern Africa, with the fare of rural South Africans, something happens. When Stephen O'Keefe bumped into his former colleague Keith Newton, blah, 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 gastrointestinal specialist, yada, yada, 10 years later, O'Keefe, professor of nutritional gastroenterology at the University of Pittsburgh in the United States, had not seen Newton since today, gut health. O'Keefe, born in Johannesburg and raised in Zambia, before training in the United Kingdom and the United States, had studied the gastrointestinal health of poor communities during his time in South Africa in the 80s. Although black South Africans had many health issues, including high rates of malnutrition, there was one respect in which they seem to have an advantage. Now, you have to remember, the malnutrition is not happening due to a lack of quality. Malnutrition is happening, in this case, from a lack of quantity. They can't get enough food. It doesn't mean there's a lack of quality. If we did colonoscopies in Africa, it was rare to find colon cancers and polyps. It was probably also rare to find somebody that agreed to do it. He found the opposite true for African Americans. In the U.S., nearly every middle-aged patient that you screened would have precancerous polyps. This got O'Keefe thinking about the role of diets on cancer risk. You don't have to be a scientist to see how different a westernized diet is from that of rural Africans, says O'Keefe. Dietary fat intake of African Americans is 2 to 3 times higher than that of rural Africans, while their fiber intake is about a third of the Africans. Epidemiological studies show that communities with high fiber intake have lower risk of colon cancer. To test the idea that diet was the key to the difference in cancer risk between the two populations, as opposed to environmental factors, for instance, O'Keefe wanted to do something completely novel, swap the diets of a group of African Americans with a group of rural South Africans and see what it did to their guts. I actually think that by doing that, I do think that switching the diets of, if he was giving the South Africans, African American food, I consider that to be unethical. I don't think that you should be, I think we already know that the Western diet is poisonous, and you shouldn't be allowed to do that to people. I mean, I guess you can if you get their permission, that they know what's going on and they know the risks, but do they really know the risks if they've never been, if they've never seen the effects of the Western diet on people? I don't know. He proposed the idea to Newton, and the pair set about designing the experiments, which would be conducted under strictly controlled circumstances. Participants would live under the surveillance of the researchers for 2 weeks. That's excellent because it's not self-reporting. The rural Africans would, they would be fed a diet of burgers, hot dogs, macaroni and cheese, while the African Americans would tuck into beans, maize, porridge, rice, and vegetable stews. So these are health-promoting foods. Okay, so keep that in mind. Beans, maize, porridge, so corn porridge, rice, and vegetable stews. In Pittsburgh, O'Keefe had access to a medical research unit with beds and kitchens. They started with 5 participants a year, adding up to a total of 20 participants over the course of the experiment. In South Africa, however, finding a suitable location was not easy. In many places, Newton found communities had already started shifting to a more westernized diet. In the end, okay, so maybe they did see the issue with the consumption of these things. They ran the experiment out of a remote backpackers lodge outside a village called whatever the hell that says. The owners, who worked closely with the surrounding communities, caring for children orphaned by HIV/AIDS. This doesn't seem like the best community to be researching health in. Recruiting participants was not difficult, especially in poor community in South Africa, where a paid stay in a warm bed with regular meals seemed like a great deal in return for a few medical tests. Both groups tolerated their diets well, although the Africans who at first were delighted with their tasty junk food reported craving their traditional fare after a few days. Yeah, after you start getting heart palpitations and chest pains and cold sweats, you might want to go back to your original diet. The results of the group swapping diets were astounding. After only 2 weeks, the gut flora of the 20 rural Africans had shifted significantly towards that seen in the cancer-prone African Americans and vice versa. The implications for rural African communities are big, says O'Keefe, who is now studying whether giving fiber supplements to Eskimos can cut their very high colon cancer risk. Take note of that. Eskimos have high rates of colon cancer because of their high meat, low fiber diet. So if we can keep up the fiber intake in Africans during the transition to westernization, this is what I don't understand. Why the hell are what you should be encouraging is the traditional diet. You should not be encouraging a transition to westernization. I recommend people watch Walter Veith's videos on diet. Hopefully we can prevent massive increase in colon cancer. Yeah, what we should be doing is promoting the African diet in the United States and Western Europe as well. This is a recap of what I think is the same study here. So they, in 2015, provides insight into just how quickly fast food can trigger biological changes. Keep this in mind. This is how fastly fast food can trigger biological changes that are detrimental to your health. So if you're thinking about just doing burgers once a week or so, keep in mind it's not as simple as, once in a while. It's not really that easy. It changes your health quickly. So in a paper, researchers asked 20 fast food loving Americans swap diets with 20 people living in rural South Africa, and found that within 2 weeks the South Africans had remarkable changes in the biomarkers that indicate colon cancer risk. The good news, however, is that the Americans also greatly reduced these biomarkers. So keep that in mind. When you eat good, you get effects pretty quickly too. In just 2 weeks, a change in diet from a westernized composition to a traditional African high-fiber, low-fat diet reduced these biomarkers of cancer risk, indicating